Recently, I had the opportunity to speak with the actress Sarah Wayne Callies, known for her roles on the hit shows Prison Break, The Walking Dead, and the USA Network series Colony. She's also a longtime supporter and voice for the International Rescue Committee. It's a fascinating look into the world of international assistance played out in battlefields, natural disasters, and politics. Here's some of that conversation. What is the International Rescue Committee?
The International Rescue Committee, we do humanitarian aid. We do work with refugees. We were founded at the behest of Albert Einstein to get the Jews out of France during the Second World War. And there have been a lot of amazing people doing brave things ever since. We're in 44 countries around the world. I visited the camps in Thailand, in Iraq, in Jordan, and I'll be going back to Central Europe in a couple of weeks to check out what's going on in Serbia and Macedonia.
Why did you get personally involved?
The simplest answer might be that I'm the granddaughter of a refugee. My grandfather came to this country when he was 8 years old with nothing. The IRC didn't exist then. There weren't many refugee services, and he fell flat on his face in New York. And his transition was a very difficult one. You know, it's a very, I think, typical refugee success story, in that by the time the second generation came along, my mom and her three brothers, they're all, you know, middle class, contributing to the American tax base and Social Security, helping to grow the economy. My mom's a professor. And so one generation in from this, you know, poor Hungarian boy who showed up with nothing, he's raising a family full of people who were really successful American citizens, which is great. But I want to help.
Well, America was built by refugees.
Absolutely.
We're all refugees.
Yeah, unless you're full-blood Native American,
right.
Your people came from somewhere.
Why don't we care about it more internationally? I mean, your committee cares about it, but why don't we care about it? Why would Americans refuse to take in refugees? Because they fear one might be something wrong. Why?
I think there's a lot of fear. And it's understandable, right? You know, everyone's first priority is protecting their families, and that's an understandable position to take. But I think with a lot of fears, if you examine them and sort of expose them to the light of facts, they can start to evaporate. For instance, there's never been an act of terrorism on American soil by a refugee. And nobody involved in Paris was a refugee. Nobody involved in the Boston Marathon bombing was a refugee. Nobody involved in 9/11 was a refugee. Refugees are the most security-vetted population that come to the United States. The head of our organization put it really well. He said, short of swimming the Atlantic Ocean, there is no more difficult way of gaining access to the United States than through the refugee program.
Your president is David Miliband, right?
Yeah.
He said political leadership from those in or aspiring to public office should involve educating public opinion, not inflaming public opinion.
Very well said.
But look
Very
what's
well
going
said.
on in this country now.
You know, what I can hope is that the American people have a kindness and a wisdom to them that sometimes transcends their elected officials and those running for office, and that I trust people in this country to see through the sort of bombastic, fear-mongering, look at me, I want attention kind of rhetoric, and see through it to the fact that, you know, hey, maybe your babysitter came from a refugee country when you were growing up, or maybe you know somebody, to start dispelling this very overblown rhetoric and start grounding it in our personal experiences. Everybody's connected to it. And, you know, if we look at history, right, during the Vietnam War, we were taking in a lot of Vietnamese refugees, and there was a lot of rhetoric about the communists are coming and they're going to make us a red country. Yeah. Well, it didn't happen. So I think we'll probably be okay this time, too.
Are you happy with the Obama administration's dealing with this topic?
I'm enormously grateful for the work that they've done trying to encourage people to look with generosity and compassion at the refugee situation. I think if we look at the numbers of refugees that, for instance, Germany and Canada have committed to taking and have already taken, I think the U.S. has not taken quite as many. And given that we have such tremendous resources, both economic and our hearts are big and we have space, I think we have the capacity to do more. And if we did, I think it would only make the country stronger. And I don't know, there's something about reaching out in kindness to another human being that strengthens something inside.
What keeps those people going? Do they have an optimism?
The people in the camps or the people who work there?
People in the camps.
People in the camps.
People who work there, I understand. I mean, they're helping.
Yeah.
But the people in the camps.
You know what I found? I found that each camp has its own identity and its own personality, which was interesting. When I was in Zatri camp in Jordan, there was a level of restlessness and rage that was unsettling. This is 2 years ago, there were, riots for food every now and again, and things were a little unsettled. When I was in Domi's camp in Kurdistan, in northern Iraq, it was primarily Syrian Kurds who had fled to Iraqi Kurdistan. And there was a tremendous amount of goodwill. My second day in the camp, I met with a group of community leaders, and they said, listen, we need schools. 100% of our kids were in school before we left Syria, and we don't want a lost generation. We need schools. So, proactively, we've gone around from tent to tent, and this is the list of teachers, their subjects, what they're qualified to teach. They had staffed already a school that did not yet exist, but they'd staffed it from kindergarten through the master's level. They had professors who were willing to teach. And they said, all we need is a building. You give us a building and we'll handle the rest. And I had tears in my eyes because I think there's a misconception that refugees come hat in hand with nothing but need. They were willing to do absolutely everything and were so proactive. There was a problem with some of the doctors where there were no female translators for the doctors. And a lot of Muslim women were not comfortable speaking through a male translator, even to a female doctor. So I went and talked to the community leaders and I said, can you find me a list of people who speak Kurdish, Arabic, and English? And an hour later, they had a list of 13 people and the tents they were in. I mean, they want to do so much for themselves, but because they have been living with now 5 years of a civil war that's targeting civilians, a civil war that's forcefully conscripting all the young men, they don't have the resources to do it for themselves.
Let's discuss your new show. Tell me about Colony.
I wanted to do Colony because I think it's relevant to a lot of the discussions that are going on. And then we shot the pilot, and LA is surrounded by a big, giant wall. And so part of Donald Trump's rhetoric starts to make me a little nervous for the parallels between what's going on with Colony. But
what happens in Colony?
Well, Colony is about occupied Los Angeles. And so from one perspective, it's a story about the genesis of insurgency or resistance. Colony sort of asks the question, would you collaborate or would you resist? It's based on the paradigm of Vichy France in the Second World War during the Nazi occupation.
Who's occupying L.A. in the story?
We're not entirely sure. We joke that it's Canada. We joke that they finally had enough and went right. There's evidence that there are people who have a vastly superior technological and military force. So, I'm tempted to be cheeky and say that could be North Korea, but I think the chances are that they came from somewhere else.
Boy, this was right up the alley for you.
This is kind of in my wheelhouse. I love this show so much.
Great seeing you.
Thank you so much.
I salute you.
Pleasure.